Princess Terith gazed out from her chamber window, her eyes tracing the distant stars that twinkled in the vast expanse of space. The alien planet, once filled with hope and promise for her, now felt cold and distant. She was the last heir to her royal lineage, but unlike her ancestors, she was different in a way that made her feel isolated. Born with a disability that left her unable to walk or perform the grand physical feats expected of her, she had always been viewed as an outsider, even within her own family. Terith's disability wasn't something that could be hidden, and she never tried to. Her planet's people valued strength and agility above all else, qualities that she lacked. As a result, she was rejected by suitors and kept at a distance by her peers. Even her own royal advisors, who should have supported her, whispered behind her back about her perceived weakness. Despite her sharp mind and kind heart, she knew that her appearance would always define how others saw her. The loneliness that plagued her was like a weight on her chest, growing heavier with each passing day. Her heart ached for the companionship and affection she saw others sharing, yet she had always been overlooked. The other royal families had hoped for a match with her, but they turned away when they saw she could not keep up with their ideals of beauty and strength. She was nothing more than a forgotten princess, one who would never be chosen to rule. Terith had spent countless nights wondering if anyone would ever see her for who she truly was, beyond her disability. If anyone would ever love her without expecting her to be something she wasn't. In her darkest moments, she found herself questioning whether she was even worthy of love or happiness. There were times when she wished she could escape to a place where she wasn't judged, where she could be free to just be herself. But as the princess of her people, she had responsibilities, and running away wasn't an option. Her royal advisors often reminded her of her duty, but Terith could never shake the feeling that they only saw her as a figurehead, someone who would never lead. The weight of her birthright felt like a constant reminder of all that she could not achieve. If only they knew that her greatest strength lay not in her body, but in the ideas and dreams she had. Yet those dreams seemed too far out of reach. In the quiet of her room, with the stars outside as her only company, Terith let out a sigh. She closed her eyes, imagining a world where she wasn't alone, where someone, anyone, could see her for the person she truly was, not just the disabled princess locked in her tower of expectations. Little did she know, that very world was about to change, brought to her by a human, someone who would see her not for her disability, but for the soul that lived within her. The calm routine of Princess Terith's life was shattered one day by the arrival of a foreign ship, a ship unlike anything she had ever seen before, its sleek, metallic surface reflecting the bright sun above. It had been decades since a human had visited her planet, and even then, the encounter had been brief and uneventful. This time, however, the air was thick with anticipation. Whispers of a human delegation reached the palace, but no one had expected this. The royal advisors, who usually spoke in hushed tones about the political value of every visitor, were all abuzz with excitement. Terith overheard their conversations in the palace halls. The humans were not just here for trade or diplomacy. They were bringing the soldier, a simple man who had been chosen to represent Earth. Terith couldn't help but feel a flicker of curiosity. She had heard stories of humans, stories that painted them as bold and brave, unlike the highly advanced, but sometimes too prideful, beings of her own world. Her thoughts raced. What would this human soldier be like? How would he view her? She had never been given the chance to meet any humans, and now one would be on her planet. She couldn't deny the excitement that stirred within her, but it was also tinged with nervousness. What if he rejected her too? As the day wore on, Terith tried to focus on her duties, but her mind kept wandering back to the human soldier. Finally, the moment arrived. The palace doors opened, and there he was, the human, Ezra. Terith's breath caught in her throat as she saw him step into the grand hall. He was tall, with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold an intensity, like he had seen things others couldn't even imagine. His simple uniform, and the way he carried himself made him appear almost out of place in the luxurious, polished surroundings of the royal court. The room fell silent as Ezra was introduced to the royal family. Terith, sitting at the edge of the grand hall, watched with careful eyes. The court was quick to pass judgment, whispering among themselves about his appearance and demeanor, but Terith didn't care about any of that. She was drawn to something else: his eyes. They were warm, not the cold, calculating gaze she was used to from others. His expression wasn't full of the usual politeness or diplomacy. It was filled with curiosity, as though he truly wanted to understand who she was. As Ezra's gaze swept over the room, his eyes briefly met Terith's. For a moment, their worlds seemed to collide in that shared instant. He didn't flinch or look away, unlike the others who avoided her gaze. He smiled, not out of politeness, but with genuine interest. It was as though he saw her as a person, not just a princess. It was a simple act, yet it felt like the world shifted in that moment. The crowd might have whispered their judgments, but Terith knew one thing for certain: this human, this soldier, was different. He wasn't looking at her with pity or condescension. He was looking at her as though she was someone worth knowing. For the first time in years, Terith allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy of more than the isolation she had been forced to endure. The question that lingered in her mind now was simple: could a human, someone from a distant world, really see beyond her disability and into the heart of who she truly was? The banquet was the grandest event of the season, and the palace halls were filled with elegant dresses and finely crafted alien armor. The air buzzed with excited chatter as nobles, dignitaries, and foreign visitors gathered to honor the arrival of the human delegation. Princess Terith, as always, was seated at the edge of the room, her presence marked but never fully acknowledged by the others. She watched as everyone around her laughed and talked, while she sat quietly, feeling like an outsider in her own palace. Ezra entered the banquet hall just as the evening's festivities began. His uniform was plain, compared to the ornate robes of the alien nobles, but his posture was strong, and there was a certain calmness in his demeanor that stood out. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply present, and that made him different. The crowd parted as the human soldier made his way to the royal family. His eyes briefly scanned the room, taking in the grand surroundings, but then they fell on her. Terith felt a strange rush in her chest as their gazes locked. It was a brief moment, but for her, it felt like an eternity. The others around her were too caught up in their conversations to notice, but Terith could feel the warmth of his gaze from across the room. It wasn't pity or judgment. It was genuine interest. His look wasn't like the one she had grown used to from her people. This was different. Ezra made his way to the royal table and was introduced to her father, the king, and the royal council. Terith remained seated, her hands folded on her lap, trying to hide the nervousness she felt inside. She had never been one for attention, especially not in a setting like this, where she had so often been the subject of whispered comments and sidelong glances. But this time was different. This human, this soldier, hadn't looked at her with scorn. He had looked at her as though she was someone he wanted to understand. As the evening wore on, Terith couldn't help but steal glances at Ezra, who was now engaged in conversation with her father. His deep voice could be heard occasionally, but his eyes never left the princess for too long. It was as though he was quietly observing, as if there was more to her than just the outer appearance her people focused on so much. Finally, as the banquet continued, Terith found herself growing bolder. She had been trying to focus on the conversations around her, but her attention kept drifting back to the human soldier. And then, as if by some unspoken agreement, their eyes met again. This time, she didn't look away. Instead, she offered him a small, tentative smile. To her surprise, he smiled back, a warm, genuine expression that made her heart skip a beat. It was a small moment, but in that instant, Terith realized something she had not allowed herself to believe for a long time. This human, this stranger from a far-off world, was not afraid to see her. And that simple act of kindness, the acknowledgement of her as a person, not just a princess, meant more than she could express. As the evening came to an end and the banquet wound down, Tirith found herself feeling something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Maybe, just maybe, this human soldier saw her for who she truly was, and that was a beginning she could never have imagined before. The days following the banquet were filled with tension and confusion for Princess Tirith. She couldn't stop thinking about Ezra, the human soldier. His warm smile, the way he looked at her as though she wasn't just a royal figure, but a person. These things had lingered in her thoughts long after the banquet had ended. But with those thoughts came doubt and fear. What if it was all just a fleeting moment? What if he was just being polite, something humans did out of respect for royalty? Tirith's heart wavered between hope and fear. She had spent so long hiding behind walls of duty and expectation that the idea of someone seeing her as she truly was seemed impossible. Her people, her advisors, none of them had ever looked at her with the kindness that Ezra had. They saw her disability first, not the person beneath it. It was a cruel reality that she had come to accept. But Ezra, he was different, and that scared her more than anything. Her daily routine continued as always, filled with royal meetings, formal duties, and the never-ending expectations of what a princess should be. The court expected perfection, strength, grace, and physical prowess. They didn't understand her struggles. And though she had grown used to their whispers, their dismissive glances, she couldn't help but feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. She had always been an outsider, even in her own palace. But Ezra, he hadn't treated her like an outsider. He had seen something in her that no one else had, and it made her heart race in ways she didn't know were possible. The very idea of being seen, truly seen for the first time in her life, terrified her. What if it was too good to be true? What if, in the end, he too would walk away, just like everyone else? Tirith often found herself alone in her private chambers, staring out at the distant stars, her mind lost in the sea of conflicting emotions. She wanted to believe in the possibility of something more, something beyond the cold walls of her royal life. But the fear of rejection had a tight grip on her heart. Could she truly allow herself to be vulnerable? Could she open her heart to someone who might not understand the pain of living a life of isolation? The princess knew she had to make a choice. She could continue hiding behind the mask of royalty, hiding from the world, or she could take a risk, a chance on something that might just be worth it. But the thought of exposing her weaknesses, of letting someone in and possibly losing them, felt like a wound too deep to bear. As she sat by her window, lost in thought, a soft knock echoed through her room. It was a sound she had grown accustomed to. Servants and attendants who came to bring news or fulfill her needs. But today, it was different. Tirith's heart skipped a beat as she stood and opened the door. Standing before her was Ezra. His presence felt like a breath of fresh air in her otherwise suffocating world. Without saying a word, he simply looked at her, his eyes filled with quiet understanding. It was as though he could see the conflict inside her, the struggle between hope and fear. And for the first time, Tirith didn't feel alone. The silence between Tirith and Ezra was thick with unspoken words. The moment he had entered her room, Tirith had felt her heart race. Ezra stood there, his expression calm but attentive, as if he were waiting for her to speak. For a brief moment, Tirith wondered if this was the moment she had feared, if she would once again have to hide the truth about herself, about her insecurities and fears. But something about Ezra made her want to be honest. She had never felt this way before, this sudden urge to open up to someone, to show the parts of herself that she usually kept hidden behind the walls of her royal duties. Ezra's presence felt like a quiet strength, a safe space where she could finally let her guard down. Tirith took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she folded them together. I don't know why you're here," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand why you look at me the way you do. Why would you choose to be around someone like me?" Ezra's expression softened, and he stepped a little closer. Why not? He asked simply. I see you, Terith, for who you really are. Not for your title, or your disability, or the expectations of others. I see you as a person, someone who is strong in ways I could never imagine. Terith felt a lump form in her throat, and she quickly looked away, unable to meet his gaze. It was too much. The kindness in his words made her feel vulnerable, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to let anyone in. She had spent so many years building walls to protect herself from the hurt of rejection, and now, this human, this soldier, was breaking them down with nothing but his words and presence. I've spent my whole life being told that I'm not enough, Terith whispered, the words spilling out before she could stop them. That I'll never be strong enough, never be the ruler they want me to be. I was never meant to be loved, never meant to be anything other than a symbol of what my people expect. Her voice cracked as she spoke, and she quickly wiped away the tear that had started to fall. Ezra reached out, his hand gentle on her shoulder. That's not true, he said softly. You are enough. You've always been enough. You just need to believe it. Terith looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard these words before, but from him, they felt different. They felt real. For the first time, someone was telling her that she wasn't broken, that she wasn't a disappointment. It was a feeling she had never allowed herself to believe. Hope. She took a shaky breath. But what if I'm too broken to be loved? What if I'm not worthy of happiness? Ezra shook his head. You don't have to be perfect, Terith. Nobody is. You're worthy of love simply because you exist, because of the person you are, not because of what you can do. Terith felt a warmth spread through her chest as she looked into his eyes. There was no pity there, no judgment, just understanding and something else, something she had never expected from anyone. Acceptance. She swallowed hard, feeling the strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could be loved for who she truly was. The days after their conversation felt like a strange, new reality for Princess Terith. She had allowed herself to believe in the possibility of love, to believe that Ezra might see her for who she truly was, not just as the princess with a disability. Yet, as the days went on, the weight of her royal duties returned, and with it, the harsh realities of her position. Ezra, though a kind and sincere human, was still a foreigner, and the royal court saw him as nothing more than an outsider. His presence in the palace had raised more than a few eyebrows, and the whispers behind closed doors had become harder to ignore. Her advisors, her people, were quick to remind her of the risks she was taking by associating with someone so different. They feared what his presence might mean for the stability of the kingdom, for the reputation of the royal family. The court was built on traditions that valued power, strength, and perfection. Terith's disability, her inability to meet these physical expectations, was a constant reminder that she would never truly belong to that world. Ezra, on the other hand, was everything her people disapproved of. A simple soldier, a human who had no place in the grand halls of royalty. One evening, during a meeting with the royal council, the tension between Terith and her advisors became impossible to ignore. The chief advisor, Lord Thilon, spoke first, his voice cold and demanding. Princess Terith, he began, his eyes narrowing. You must understand that your actions have consequences. This human, this soldier, is not of our world. His presence here is a threat to the dignity of this royal family. You must distance yourself from him, for the good of the kingdom. Terith's heart sank as she heard the words. She had expected resistance, but hearing it from Lord Thilon, someone she had once trusted, stung deeper than she anticipated. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The weight of her responsibilities, her royal obligations, felt suffocating. But he sees me for who I am, she finally managed to say, her voice quiet but firm. He doesn't look at me with pity or as a symbol of weakness. He sees me for who I am inside. Lord Thalon's expression hardened. That may be true, Your Highness, But what of your people? What will they think? What will the other kingdoms think when they see the royal family so weak, so vulnerable? Terith felt the sting of his words. She had spent so long trying to live up to the expectations of others that she had forgotten to ask herself what she truly wanted. But now she had Ezra, someone who valued her for who she was, someone who saw her strength despite everything. And yet, here she was, being told to turn her back on him for the sake of tradition. "I cannot choose my people over my heart, Lord Thilon," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I will not live a life dictated by fear and expectations. I want to choose my own path, even if it means disappointing you and the others." The room fell silent. Terith's words echoed in the air, and for the first time, she felt a small spark of courage. She wasn't going to let fear control her any longer. She had found something worth fighting for, someone who saw her for who she truly was. Lord Thelen gave her a look of disapproval that said nothing more. The tension in the room remained, but Terith stood tall. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that for the first time, she was no longer afraid to walk it. She had Ezra by her side, and that was all that mattered. The tension in the royal palace had grown thicker with every passing day. Princess Terith could feel it in the air, a sense of unease that seemed to grip the hearts of everyone around her. The whispers behind closed doors had only become louder, and her advisors' disapproving glares were harder to ignore. Yet despite all the pressure, Terith found herself standing firm in her decision. She would not turn away from Ezra. Not now, not after everything he had shown her. Ezra, too, had sensed the growing tension. He had seen the way the court had looked at him, the way they treated him as nothing more than an outsider. But none of that mattered to him. He had come to Terith's world not for political gain or wealth, but because he truly believed in the princess. He had seen something in her that no one else had, a strength that came from within, something that transcended physical abilities or royal expectations. He couldn't stand by and watch Terith be forced to choose between her heart and her people. He had spent too many years following orders, never questioning what was right. But for Terith, he knew he had to do something different. He had to make a stand, to prove that love and loyalty weren't bound by tradition or the expectations of a royal court. One afternoon, after a particularly heated meeting with the council, Ezra knew it was time. He couldn't let Terith face this alone anymore. He was no longer going to be a passive observer in her life. He was going to show her that he was willing to fight for her, no matter the consequences. He waited for her in the palace garden, the sun slowly setting in the distance. The soft hum of the palace and the occasional call of distant birds filled the air. When Terith appeared, she looked tired, her expression weighed down by the pressure she had been carrying for so long. But when her eyes met Ezra's, something shifted. She saw the determination in his gaze, and for the first time, she didn't feel like she was alone. "I won't stand by while they tear you apart," Ezra said quietly, his voice steady. "I don't care about the court, Terith. I don't care about the expectations or the rules they want to impose on you. I care about you, and I will not let anyone make you feel like you don't deserve love, or that you have to hide who you are." Terith's breath caught in her throat. His words were so simple, but they meant everything to her. She had never expected Ezra to speak out against her own people, to put everything on the line for her. But there he was, ready to fight for her, to stand beside her in a way that no one ever had. "Ezra," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't just go against the entire court. They'll never accept us. I'm not like them. I don't have what they want from me." He stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "They don't get to decide who you are, Terith. You decide. And if that means standing by you, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done, then I will. I'll be here for you, no matter what." Terith felt tears well up in her eyes. She had spent so long living in fear of rejection, of never being enough. But here, standing in front of her, was a man who saw her for who she truly was, who loved her, not despite her disability, but because of the strength and heart that lay within her. "Will you be mine, Terith?" Ezra asked, his voice soft but unwavering. "Not because of what anyone else thinks, but because of who you are." Terith's heart soared, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a true sense of peace. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. With Ezra by her side, she had already found her worth. She nodded, her voice full of emotion. "Yes, yes, Ezra, I will." In that moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from her shoulders. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. With Ezra by her side, she knew she could stand up to anything, even the very world that had once rejected her. Together, they would show the court that love, not tradition, would define their future. The days that followed were not without their challenges. Princess Terith knew that the royal court would not simply accept her decision to stand by Ezra. The whispers and disapproving looks continued, but this time, they didn't faze her as much. Ezra was by her side, and that was all that mattered. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. Ezra's presence became a comforting constant in Terith's life. He was patient with her, never rushing her to make decisions or expecting anything from her that she wasn't ready to give. Every moment with him felt like a small step toward the future she had always dreamed of, one where she was free to be herself, where her worth wasn't defined by the expectations of others. They spent more time together, often walking through the royal gardens or talking late into the night about their worlds. Hers, full of tradition and responsibility. His, simple and free. Ezra was amazed by Terith's intelligence and strength, qualities that went unnoticed by many but shone brightly to him. He would often tell her that she was the strongest person he had ever met, and though she found it hard to believe at first, his words slowly began to sink in. She wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. She was just different, and that difference was something to be celebrated, not hidden away. One afternoon, as they sat together in the garden, Ezra reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Terith turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. She still wasn't used to the tenderness he showed her, the kindness that made her feel valued in a way she never thought possible. "I never thought I would find someone like you," Ezra said, his voice quiet but full of meaning. "Someone who doesn't see me for what I am, but for who I am." Terith smiled, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "I've never met anyone like you, either. You see me, Ezra, not just the princess, not just the disability. You see me for who I really am, and that means more to me than I can say." The moment was perfect, the air filled with the sounds of the garden and the quiet hum of life. But even in this peaceful moment, Terith knew that the storm was still coming. The court would not let her defy their expectations without a fight. And while she had Ezra's support, she still had doubts about whether the rest of her world would ever accept them as a couple. But Ezra never seemed worried. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew that the bond they shared was worth fighting for. He would stand by her, no matter what the court said, no matter what the others thought. Together, they could face anything. As the sun set behind the palace, casting a soft golden light over the garden, Terith felt a sense of peace she hadn't known before. The future was uncertain, but with Ezra beside her, she finally felt ready to face whatever came next. The court might not accept them now, but in time, they would see the truth. Love didn't follow tradition. It followed the heart, and Terith's heart had found its place with Ezra. For the first time in her life, Terith wasn't afraid to be herself. She wasn't alone anymore. And with Ezra by her side, she knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. The tension in the palace had reached a breaking point. Princess Terith could feel it in the air, a heavy weight pressing down on her every step. Her decision to stand by Ezra, the human soldier, had not gone unnoticed. The court, once filled with whispers and judgment, now seemed to be gathering for a final confrontation. It was clear that the royal advisors, and even some members of the royal family, would not accept her choice so easily. Lord Thillon, the chief advisor, had made his stance clear. "A princess who chooses a human over her own people cannot lead this kingdom," he had said in one of their earlier meetings. His words had stung, but they only fueled Tirith's resolve. She wasn't going to let her people's expectations control her life. Ezra had shown her a kind of love she had never believed was possible, and she wasn't about to throw that away for the sake of royal tradition. The royal court had decided to challenge her decision. They would test Ezra's worth, not just as a man, but as someone who could stand in her world. The test was simple. He would have to prove himself by completing a series of difficult trials, tests that had been designed for the strongest warriors of the kingdom. They thought he would fail. They thought he would fall short. And if he did, they believed Tirith would finally see the truth, that a human could never be worthy of her. The first trial was a strength test. Ezra was led into the royal arena, a large open space surrounded by the high stone walls of the palace. In front of him stood a massive stone boulder, the kind of challenge only the strongest of the royal soldiers could attempt. The goal was to lift it, to prove that he could match the power expected of someone in Tirith's world. Ezra stepped forward, his eyes focused, his hands steady. The crowd, including many members of the court, watched with bated breath. Tirith stood at the back, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no doubt in Ezra's strength. He had shown her time and time again that his courage and determination were beyond anything she had ever seen. But would the court see that? Would they look past his human form and see his heart? Ezra placed his hands on the boulder and gripped it tightly. The tension in the air was palpable as he strained to lift it. His muscles flexed, his face showing the effort it took to move the massive stone. Slowly, inch by inch, the boulder began to rise. The crowd gasped in disbelief as Ezra, with sheer determination, lifted the stone above his head. The silence that followed was deafening. It took only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. The court had expected failure, but Ezra had succeeded. He had proven himself in a way no one had thought possible. The royal advisors exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to make of what they had just witnessed. Tirith felt a rush of pride as she watched him. She knew this wasn't just about strength. It was about his unwavering belief in himself and in her. Ezra had done what no one had expected because he had the courage to stand up for what he believed in, no matter how impossible the challenge seemed. The royal test had failed to break him. In fact, it had shown the court exactly what she had known all along. Ezra was not just a human soldier. He was someone worthy of her love, and worthy of a place by her side. Tirith knew the battle wasn't over. But in that moment, as the crowd erupted into reluctant applause, she felt a small victory. With Ezra's strength, and their bond growing stronger each day, they would face whatever came next together. The royal court was in turmoil. The test of strength, which had been designed to break Ezra and prove to the court that he was unworthy of Princess Tirith, had only shown the truth. Ezra was stronger than they had ever imagined. He had lifted the massive stone boulder, defying the expectations of the royal advisors, and proving that strength was not measured by species or tradition. It was measured by heart, determination, and will. Yet, even with this remarkable achievement, the court remained unconvinced. The whispers continued, and the pressure on Tirith grew heavier with each passing day. Lord Thilon, the chief advisor, refused to accept the reality that Tirith's heart had found its place with Ezra. He and others in the royal family began to make their feelings known, pressuring the princess to abandon her relationship with the human soldier before it became a public scandal. Tirith, however, felt a sense of peace she had never known before. Ezra had shown her something that no one in her royal life ever had, the truth of what love was. He had not only passed the test, but he had also shown her that true worth came from within, not from what others expected of her. No longer would she let her life be dictated by tradition or the approval of others. One afternoon, Tirith called Ezra to meet her in the palace gardens. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the flowers and trees. The soft breeze rustled the leaves as she waited for him, her heart filled with a mixture of anticipation and excitement. She had made her decision. The road ahead would be challenging, but she knew that together, they could face whatever came their way. When Ezra arrived, he looked at her with a gentle smile, his eyes filled with understanding. He didn't need to ask what was on her mind. He could see the determination in her eyes. Terith stepped forward, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I've made my choice, Ezra," she said, her eyes meeting his. "I will not let anyone tell me who I should love or who I should be. I choose you. I choose a life with you, not because it's easy, but because it feels right. The court may never accept us, but that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we stand together." Ezra's expression softened, and he stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "Terith, I don't need anyone's approval. All I need is you. I've never felt more at home than I do when I'm with you. You are everything to me." Terith felt a wave of relief wash over her. For so long, she had lived with the weight of expectations, never allowing herself to believe in the possibility of happiness. But now, with Ezra by her side, she could finally see a future that was hers to create. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Terith smiled, a sense of peace filling her heart. They had overcome the trials set before them. They had faced the challenges and defied the odds. And now, for the first time, Terith felt like she was truly free. Free to love who she chose, free to be who she was meant to be, and free to create a life with Ezra. One where they could both be themselves, without fear or shame. The journey ahead would not be without its difficulties, but Terith knew that with Ezra by her side, they could face anything. Together, they had already proven that love, not tradition, was the most powerful force in the universe. And that, she realized, was all they needed to build a future that was theirs alone. Terith and Ezra stood hand in hand, looking toward the horizon. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, Terith felt hopeful. They had their love, and that was all they truly needed. It was a new beginning, and together, they would face whatever came next, stronger and more united than ever.